Today we're talking about VPNs. Not those VPNs that advertise to you though. So if you follow my channel, you've probably heard of Wireguard. And maybe you think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, since, well, that's what the forums think these days, right? But if you care about things other than having the fewest lines of code in the project, or the single core performance throughput on a device with no hardware acceleration, then maybe there are some other options that might be better suited for you. Now I'm talking about like features for users. If you run like a business network or even a large home network, you might have a large number of users connecting back into your network. You want to be able to authenticate them using your existing authentication databases. You want to have strong certificate-based authentication. You want to be able to have load balancing across multiple servers. You want to be able to put them into group-based roles, do firewall access, things like that. And those are all things that WireGuard just doesn't do. Now, I mean, someone could build a system based on WireGuard that does these things, but WireGuard at a protocol level doesn't really let you add any authentication headers. You're stuck with a bare ED25519 curve private key. You have no certificate with no issuing body, chain of trust, that kind of stuff. You have no usernames, passwords as an option, no post-quantum key exchange. None of that's possible with WireGuard because the protocol is defined as it is with no changes. Now, OpenVPN. That's an open source project that's been around for a long time. They've got the key exchange method that they've inherited from transport layer security TLS. So that's widely used to secure basically the whole internet. It supports a wide range of authentication methods from certificates, public keys, usernames, passwords, mixing and matching, two-factor authentication, all kinds of stuff like that. It's highly configurable. You can do all of this configuration in your infrastructure on the server side, push configuration out to clients. They don't have to worry about downloading a private key in a WireGuard file and keeping that secret. None of that. OpenVPN can manage all that for you. So today, I'm taking a look at OpenVPN, both the open source community edition as well as the commercial product OpenVPN Access Server. Now, everything I'm talking about in this video can be done both in the open source and the paid version, and I'll show you how to do it both ways, but the paid version provides a nicer user interface if you're paying to save time, essentially. So I'm going to look at certificate-based authentication, usernames and passwords with two-factor codes, and security firewall rules for your VPN users. So if all of that sounds good to you, if you're managing a user access VPN for your business or your large home network, then come along on this adventure. Okay, so I know like VPN ads dominate what people think of when they think of VPNs, but there's actually quite a few different use cases of VPNs. And I'm very specifically talking about one use case in this video, and that is remote users accessing a secured network. So imagine I'm a small business owner. I mean, I am. Imagine I'm not working out of my basement. Well, I don't have a basement, but not working out of this library here. And I have some employees. Let's say I have 3 employees, and they need to connect back to my corporate network. So on my corporate network, I have some servers. They access the servers, they do their work, etc. I manage data integrity, backups, etc. so that laptop failures don't cause massive business risk. This would be the same if you're like a home user, you have remote people accessing your Jellyfin server, stuff like that. We have data in a centralized network that works well, and we need to provide access to that for individual remote users. So this is a very different application for 2 servers talking to each other. In that case, we would usually rely on automation instead of giving the client config files and things like that. And it's also different from a sort of privacy VPN you see shielded on the internet, although the technology, the transport works similarly. Okay, so 3 users here. These are just random people from my Discord server. I hired them. I need to get them to connect to my corporate network. So I go online, I generate some WireGuard configs. There's some free generators for that. I give them each their private key and their IP address. So that means I have to provision them with what their IP address is right now. So I've assigned them each an IP address. I've assigned them each a private key. Put that all in my server config. So my server now knows everyone's IP, everyone's public key, and the server's own private key. And all of that information is static, and it never goes over the protocol. So the protocol assumes you have a way to distribute this. So I email them the keys, we're good. So now I bring in the 4th user, hired a new employee. I generate a private key, I generate a new IP address, add it to my spreadsheet, send it to them, log into the server remotely, add their public key to the server's config, tell the server to reload config. That worked fine at this scale of 4 users. Fundamentally though, WireGuard's authentication, how these guys are authenticating to my server, and how my server is proving its own identity to them, is based entirely on public-private key pairs. So WireGuard uses Curve 25519 public and private keys. These are not certificates, these are just bare keys. So they don't have an expiration date, they don't have a chain of trust, any of that. And so we can't revoke a key unless we manually log into everyone and revoke it. We can't generate a new key, so if I add a second server here, I can't sign both of these from the same authority. I have to either directly copy the key or tell the users which server to log into, and that gets a lot more complicated. I mean, these are things that can be solved in like a server-to-server environment, but if I suddenly have 100 users over here, it gets a lot harder to solve. And if my business were to grow to 100 users like this, maybe I have some sort of certification requirements, I have actual cybersecurity policy I have to meet, data protection, that kind of stuff. And so maybe I actually am required to implement things like two-factor authentication, need to make my users do TOTP, maybe I need to make them use hardware keys like a YubiKey, which are incredibly secure, but WireGuard doesn't support using like standard X509 certificates, so that's right out. WireGuard doesn't support TOTP, so that one's out too. Any third-party solution I use that makes them log into a web browser or something like that, that's now introducing a side channel that's not secured the same way WireGuard was. WireGuard security was of course formally validated, but that's only WireGuard itself. If you're adding an application on top that does two-factor, that's not part of WireGuard's native validation. Or maybe I'm very concerned about quantum computing, and I want to support post-quantum key exchange methods. So OpenVPN and IPsec, by the way, both support ML-Chem for post-quantum key exchange. WireGuard doesn't, and it never can, because the protocol does not allow protocol-level expansion. It's stuck with the same key exchange methods forever. So anyway, back to my example with 3 or 4 employees. How would I set that up with two-factor in OpenVPN access server? So back over here on the work table, I got my test set up. This guy is my little firewall. He's running OpenVPN access server. So I installed him on Kali Linux, which is basically like Debian. This guy, he's also running Kali Linux. He's going to be my user. So this is the guy I've just hired, we'll say. And I need to set his computer up to access my network remotely over the VPN. So he doesn't have any software installed yet. I'm starting from ground zero here. So I got to create a user account on the access server. And I got the software installed on this guy. And then I got to get his account provisioned, his multi-factor set up. I'm going to use TOTP on my phone for this, for two-factor authentication. So let's get this going. So over here on the server side, I just got OpenVPN access server. This is the commercial product. I'm using it unlicensed, so I get 2 free connections. I'm going to go over here in users and make a new user called my test user. And so we have no groups for him. We're going to allow auto login, and we're going to use auth method of local. So they support other features like Radius or LDAP, Active Directory, and I don't have any of those set up in this test setup, so I just have a small local user database. But they support all of these other auth forms if you'd like. Okay, let's see, we're going to require MFA, and then we could also give him a static IP, we could give him port forwarding and some other features like that, but we generally won't need that for users. I'll go ahead and save that. Then I'm going to reset his password. So I've chose testing 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and reset that and restart. So here on the client system, should be able to log in as testing. Let's see, there's our username and our password, and there we go. So now it's telling me I have to enroll MFA, and it gave me a QR code to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and scan that on my phone, and wow, it came up real fast. Okay, my code is 026565. So now that I got my multi-factor set up, it's telling me I need OpenVPN for Linux, which might be helpful, except I actually don't because I have Network Manager, which already supports it. So I can go ahead, download the connection profile, which I already did, go here to add a VPN connection. Now it slightly confusingly says create a VPN connection, and you might think you need to pick OpenVPN, but I actually need to say import saved configuration. And then I'll go ahead and navigate to where I put that file, and we'll go ahead and import it. And now it has figured out everything I need. So now I should be able to tell it to connect, and let's see what's going on here. VPN connection has been successfully established. So that was an auto login profile, but let me try creating another one that is not auto login. Let's go ahead and download that. So now I have one that requires me to log in every time, depending on what your security requirements are. I'll go ahead and we will configure that. So one quirk here is that Network Manager uses the name of the system user, and that is not my name. So my name is testing, and then I also need a password here if I want to save it. So go ahead and save that. Now it should let me connect to home user locked. So here's where we do multi-factor. So it says enter authenticator code. So I'll go over my phone, 851169. Go ahead. And there we go, we're on the network. So we got TOTP now. We met our cyber insurance requirements, whatever we had. That was using OpenVPN Access Server, the commercial product. And actually the only reason I agreed to make this video with OpenVPN is because they let me look at the open source version as well. So now I'm going to set that exact same demo up using the Community Edition open source version. So this guy is now going to switch to running the open source OpenVPN server. That means I'm writing my config files in plain text, showing them to you. This guy is now going to connect to that server, and we're going to see if we can do the same thing, username and password plus TOTP, over purely the open source server. So I'm back over here in the test system. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new VPN connection again. This time I'm going to configure it manually though, because I know all the things to put in, because I'm doing this with the open source version. Let's go ahead and create that. So I guess we'll call it VPN connection 1, that's a fine name. So I need to give it the address of my server. And for authentication type, I'm going to use password in this case. So a username, in this case that's Alice. I'm going to type my password in when I log in. And I need a certificate for the server end, which I already downloaded here, so we'll select that, root.pem. And I don't think I need to change any other settings here. So now I come over here to VPN connection, we'll start my new connection, I need the password. This is actually the password for the system to access that connection. So now I need the password for the VPN itself, which is still testing 1, 2, 3. And now it should ask me for two-factor. There we go, AppLard needs your TOTP code. So let me pull that up on my phone here. 162556. 162556. There we go, and I'm established. So here's the config I ended up with here. So I just got basic stuff until we get down to TOTP. So I am using verify client cert none because I'm using just usernames and passwords. And then I've got auth user pass verify, and I've got this Python script that I wrote that does the verify. I tried using CR response, but I'll get to why that didn't work in a second. And then I also tried static challenge, that didn't work either. But this script ended up working well for me. So OpenVPN essentially has like 2 or 3 different ways at the protocol layer that they can request this TOTP. So the oldest method was called static challenge, and that method you would put the static challenge in the client's config file and the client would prompt for it. That was the oldest way of doing it. Unfortunately, Network Manager doesn't support that, so I can't do that. The next way was you would reject the auth, and the error code for the rejection would include the challenge. So that's what I'm using here, and that's what works fine. The newest method that OpenVPN is migrating to is what's called the CR response, and that allows much more flexibility in how the challenges work. You can ask them to open a web page, you can do other things like that, different auth flows for the VPN. And again, Network Manager doesn't support all of these on their plugin. OpenVPN's app, like for Windows, for macOS, for Android, those all do support these newest challenges just fine. But Network Manager is a bit old, and Debian's also bundling an even older version of OpenVPN, so that's not great. But I got this to work with this method, which is a sort of intermediate method. So look at my script here, it's just written in Python. I'm using PyOTP to do this. I just wrote a basic database here of the users, so I have Alice and Bob. They have a password, which is definitely secure. And I just used the TOTP secret ABCD because it was easier to type in on my phone. So down here for the login flow, the first thing that happens is the login. We get a username and a password passed to us by OpenVPN. We end up down here in the else. So we compare this password to the user's expected password and we reject it if it's wrong. So if we got here, then the user typed in the right password but didn't give us a challenge. So we need to generate an error message, which we format with a CRV1, RE, etc. Apple needs the OTTP code. And this is the error message we send back to the client, and it recognizes that this error message is a code that it has to do something with. So we have to add a state variable. This is how we prevent replay attacks. We then have to add the username in base64 and the message we want them to display. We write that out to OpenVPN. It goes ahead and redoes the request. So then we come back into this file again on the second request, and we look for the coded response in the password. So it'll encode the password with the CRV1. We then split that apart into the response. So then we can verify the state, and from there we can verify the TOTP code is correct using the PyOTP library. This verify state and the make state, I'm just using like a JSON web token sort of structure. So this just prevents token replay attacks. So I take the username and the time, and then I hash it with a secret so that this Python script knows that it wasn't replayed. So one other sort of security building block that OpenVPN does really well, the WireGuard doesn't do at all, is managing certificates. So back to my example here, I got 3 employees, right? I got access server so they can access my network. I could hard code or put in a config file on the server all the users that are allowed to access it and their keys. That's what we do with WireGuard. But instead of that, if I had 100 users here instead of 3, that would become a really long list of keys, and that would get hard to maintain. I mean, I could put it in a database, clear the database, etc. But what I could also just do is sign their key with another key. So every user could have a certificate. The certificate says like their name. Normally user certs we do like a sort of email style, so like user@applr.net. So then I could have a certificate authority key that I use to sign the certificate, and then they can identify themselves with their certificate. And because their certificate was signed by a certificate above it, we call that a chain of trust. So if the server trusts the high-level certificate, then any leaf certificate signed by it is then trusted as well. And we can make chains as long as we want. Usually they're only 2 or 3 layers deep. So now I generate a root key. Up here I keep it private. I use this to sign a certificate for each of my users. This could be part of some automation flow. I could generate this on a TPM, hardware security module. There's all kinds of options for how to manage X509 certificate security outside of just OpenVPN, because it's also used for like mutual TLS, Windows Active Directory, things like that, all rely on these certificates. So they're all over in most businesses. Then I don't have to put all of these individual certs down at the access server. I can just put the root's public key at the access server, and it knows that any cert that was signed by this root is trusted. So then, as long as I have a procedure in place for rolling over these certs periodically, which is something Active Directory does, and most businesses kind of, at least above a certain size, have a cert management in place already as a side effect of that. So I can depend on that. I could issue them on my own. OpenVPN Access Server actually has this all built in as well, so all of my examples using the Access Server have already been using certificates. But this greatly reduces the amount of fan out of, if I have 1 million users, do I have to put 1 million lines of config in each server, that kind of stuff, by using trusted certificates. Of course, it works the other way too. I can create a certificate authority, use that to sign the certs for all of my access servers. Now, when the user connects to an access server, it gets the certificate for that specific access server. Each access server is unique. They can be revoked, they can be rekeyed, etc. as different access servers come and go. We don't have to copy and paste the same key material to multiple servers like we would in WireGuard. It's a much simpler process for the users as well in this case. So now I want to do a really secure demo with a hardware token here, a YubiKey. So now my 2 factors become the thing I have, which is the YubiKey itself, which stores the certificate, and also the password I know, which is the PIN number for the YubiKey. So I don't have to have usernames and passwords. I just plug this guy in and I'm ready to go. But if I go over here to connect and I click connect, it tells me I need an external certificate because I have a profile with no certificate. So let's get that set up. So I can go over here to my profiles and I can edit this profile. And so it sees here that it needs a certificate, but it doesn't have one. So OpenVPN supports using external certificate stores, like the operating system cert store if you wanted to use one of the macOS or Windows Active Directory certs. But I can also go here and I can choose a hardware token as well. So I could choose, in this case, my YubiKey 5. I have my very secret PIN number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like the kind of code an idiot would use in their luggage. And then I can pick this guy. It's from the OpenVPN CA, so this was done by the access server, but it works the same for open source. So we just go ahead and hit save there, and now I should be able to connect. I again need my PIN number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's go. There we go, now we're connected. So it was that easy. Now to actually load the key, I did that with YubiKey Manager. And I just went to the PIV app, configured certificates, and I imported it into slot 9. So I just took the PEM file, which came from OpenVPN, imported it here along with the key, and we're good. So I guess now the final puzzle piece to solve is how do we restrict access for my users to different destinations on my network? So as a small company, as a startup, I probably initially have users that wear a lot of hats. So maybe if I have 3 or 4 users, I can just let them access everything internally. But as I grow, I'm probably going to be able to want to restrict which groups of users can access which internal services. So first off, I'd like to remind everyone, IP addresses on their own are not an identity. We need some additional information to guarantee that that IP address is owned by a specific user or device for it to become a meaningful security identifier. So in WireGuard, this was pretty simple. Every client has an IP address. They have to have an IP address because WireGuard can't give them an IP address. So we know what that is. We have a one-to-one mapping. Now OpenVPN can do that too, but it has a lot of different ways it can operate. So the client could choose its IP address and run with that. Most of the time, though, the OpenVPN server is going to tell the client what IP address it should get as part of establishing the connection. And of course, the OpenVPN server has a ton of flexibility in how it can choose those addresses it assigns to clients. So in OpenVPN Community, the open source server, we have a hook script option. This is like a shell script or Python script you can run every time a client connects. And part of that is you can choose what IP address you want to give the client, what DNS server you want to give the client, if you want to push full routes or default routes or whatever to the client. All of that can be scripted on the server side. And you can also write individual client override files if you want to do it with config files instead of a script. So one approach you could take is you could say I've got people from finance, I've got people from HR, etc. They're going to get pushed into a different subnet. So we're still dynamically allocating them, but now we're giving them a group-based subnet so we can use firewall rules based on that subnet on the VPN server. On our firewall, we can say 192.168.2 means this, 192.168.3 means that, if you're using IPv4 legacy stuff. So that is one approach. The second approach is we could keep track of who has access to which IP address and edit our firewall rules on the fly, our IP list, that kind of stuff. So OpenVPN Community Edition, open source version, essentially leaves you with this. You have all the tooling in the server to assign IPs to clients. We've already authenticated the client, so we have strong trust that the client is who they say they are. And so by binding an IP address to that, we can now use the IP address as an identifier for that client. That tooling is all in the open source server. Now the access server, the paid product, adds a whole UI for this. So we can give dedicated memberships, dedicated firewall rules to individual users at the user level, and the access server will track their IP address and write the appropriate net filter rules for us. So let's see what that looks like. So back over here on the access server, I got my user testing. Let's say they are part of the finance group. So I guess we'll make a new group for them. We'll call it finance. And we'll go ahead and save that. So now I have a group, and I can add rules to this group that my members must adhere to. So we can say they're all users. They're not allowed to auto log in because this is a more secure group. They have to enter their password every time. We can enforce multi-factor on this group. We could assign a specific subnet to the group if we want to do authentication on an external firewall box. If you have some fancy firewall you want to use instead, you can do it here. And we can also add more ranges. And then I can go ahead and save that. So then I'll add a user, I'll add my testing user to this group. So now they are a member. And then here I can start adding access rules. So this is my internal IPv4 subnet. So we've inherited a rule that says we can access everything. But I could add another rule, so 192.168.1.6. I don't know. So then we can choose to NAT or route it. Now, OpenVPN access server is quite IPv4 centric. In fact, I don't even think it supports IPv6. So it's doing a lot of NATing. It's sort of the default. So if you put the access server on your network, it's going to NAT traffic so that it appears from the access server. But in a more advanced setup, you'd probably use route here, and you would route your VPN subnet back to this node on the network. But you can do it either way here. And so I can say this group can access that. And so now it has access to this IP via route for users in that group. We also have the ability to restrict intergroup connectivity. So this means connecting two groups to each other, so users talking to other users, and things like that. So here in the access control tab, I can look up all the rules total. So I can see I have this rule for the finance group, but I could create a new rule just for a specific user if I wanted. So maybe he needs to get to 192.168.1.7. We'll go ahead and say that via route. And now we can see what rules he has access to. So if I go to testing here, we can see these are all the rules that this user fits into. So inherited from himself, inherited from his group, inherited from global, etc. So that's what I got for you today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look at OpenVPN Access Server as well as the open source community edition. Now both of them are developed by OpenVPN, the company, who did sponsor today's video, but I did only agree to work with them if they let me talk about both the open source version and the paid version as well. Now, VPN technology is certainly something that gets the comments all kinds of heated up. I've definitely gotten comments about why don't you just use WireGuard, why don't you just do NAT, all kinds of things every time I've touched on VPN technology or even VPN adjacent technology, like not using a VPN and securing TLS instead. I do have plenty more videos on similar topics planned. I like to go into detail on some of the alternatives to using VPN, like using SSH key-based auth, mutual TLS, that kind of stuff. But I've been really busy lately, so sorry I haven't been as good at making videos as usual. Now, I did wear some of my own shirts and some of not my own shirts in this video, but if you like the orange Home Lab, your own personal data center shirt, I do sell that one. See my merch store link down below for that. Currently I have free shipping from the US. All my orders are still shipping from the US at the moment, so it is what it is. If you want to follow me, I have a Discord server link down below. We chat about all kinds of cool stuff like networking, routing, BGP, that kind of stuff. You can give me tips on my Ko-fi, link down below for that as well, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next adventure.